Glad you could join us today on Earthfile. Welcome to the program. I'm Ayola Kasim. Global warming is increasing the frequency and intensity of some types of extreme weather. For example, warming is causing more rain to fall in heavy downpours. There are also longer dry periods between rainfalls. This year, climate disasters have affected millions of people around the world. Here in Nigeria, thousands have been displaced by flood, and more than 160 people have died, with at least 1,000 more missing following floods in Germany and Belgium that swept away buildings, cut phone communications, and forced thousands to flee their homes. Meanwhile, extreme heat wave in Western North America has been responsible for the devastating extreme wildfires in the region, with Canada and Western U.S. states facing record-smashing high temperatures that have killed hundreds. Climate scientists have warned for decades that the climate crisis will lead to more extreme weather. They said it will be deadly and it will be more frequent. The overarching question is, will the increase in climate disasters in developed countries spur more climate action by them? We'll look at the state of things and what is being done at the moment. Just stay with us. An immense, swiftly spreading wildfire raged through drought-parched timber and brush in south-central Oregon for a ninth day on Wednesday, 14th of July, threatening more than 2,000 homes and displacing hundreds of residents with little sign of slowing.
I just am I have to say, fearful about what this bodes for the rest of the summer, because we didn't see these extremes last year until late August and September, and we're still in mid-July right now.
1 week later, the so-called bootleg fire had merged with a nearby log fire, which in part accounts for the jump in total acreage over the past day. More than 2,000 firefighters are working on the more than 388,000-acre fire, now ranked as the largest of 83 large wildfires burning more than 1.2 million acres across 13 states in the United States. Nearly 20,000 firefighters are working to contain the flames, with the highest number of fires in Montana, Idaho, Oregon, California, and Washington. Coming in the midst of record-shattering temperatures across the West, the bootleg fire has been stoked by hot, dry, windy weather and vegetation desiccated by prolonged drought, a combination that has accelerated the spread of the flames, officials said. It also reflects a climate crisis.
This drought is going to have massive effects on both our agriculture this year as well as the agriculture industry into the next couple of years. I mean, drought annually costs the United States $10 to $14 billion, but let's look back to the 2012 drought, which many of us may remember as something that looked like the Dust Bowl. That drought cost $35 billion. This drought is much worse than that. And that $35 billion was largely to the agricultural sector. And so what you might imagine is stalled acres that won't be planted. They literally 600,000 acres this year that simply will not be used because they can't be used. This will affect the livelihoods, long-term livelihoods of farmers in this area, as well as potentially their mental health, increased stress endured by these economic hardships, and the expectation and the justified expectation that this could continue on to the future, as well as their ability to support their families, to remain in the places that they live. There may even be potentially some community displacement as we see growing droughts and patterns of droughts and heat and fire. Often these kinds of events are combined as we're seeing them now. This may displace communities and farmers themselves.
Last year, dozens of late summer wildfires, many of them sparked by dry lightning storms, killed more than 3 dozen people and charred more than 10.2 million acres in California, Oregon, and Washington. The National Weather Service said that the heat wave that brought temperatures of 54 degrees Celsius to California's Death Valley had nearly peaked, with more moderate temperatures expected. The unseasonal heat wave, triggered by a lingering high-pressure system, is already the third for the region this year, an anomaly that some experts have attributed to climate change. The high temperatures come as forest and brushwood are already bone dry across the West from years of severe drought, contributing to what authorities say could be an intense fire season.
So one thing in particular that's not fixable if we don't act quickly in the next 5 to 10 years is sea level rise. If we don't act quickly, sea level rise will essentially flood every major city on the coasts. This will drive population movement and cause massive social disruption. It will affect Miami, New York, San Francisco, Los Angeles, all the cities that we know of as the face of America, really. These cities will look totally different than they do today. This country will also be increasingly hot, as we are seeing right now on the West Coast. So we'll see increasing frequency of extreme events. We'll see them much more frequently than we've seen them in the past, and they will be more intense. And this has very massive health costs, as well as the mortality and morbidity from related health issues will become ubiquitous, especially in urban areas where we have the urban heat island effect.
Dry, hot weather has also spurred scores of wildfires in Canada in recent weeks, as a bout of extreme heat is believed to have contributed to hundreds of deaths in the province of British Columbia in June. But while North America battles heat waves and wildfire, roads in Europe were turned to rivers, some vehicles were swept away and swaths of land buried under thick mud. The European floods, which began on Wednesday, the 14th of July, have mainly hit the German state of Rhineland-Palatinate, North Rhine-Westphalia, as well as parts of Belgium. Entire communities have been cut off without power or communications. Lara Tillman is slowly recovering from the shock of seeing her hometown destroyed by last week's floods, in which over 170 people lost their lives. She still finds it hard to believe that everything she used to know in the little town of Insel has been wiped away by water and mudslides.
Here, where we're standing, used to be the old sports grounds. This is where we had any festivities. We had Oktoberfest here. May Day was celebrated here. Just at the corner, you can see the last tree and the remains of the bridge. Behind that was a whole street. The whole street has just been wiped out. There were 4 or 5 houses there, and now you can't even guess where the properties stood. If you didn't know it, you wouldn't even be able to tell that this used to be a lovely square where everyone used to meet.
Lara lives in Cologne. I was there when the floods took over her hometown. She was unable to contact her family after 7 o'clock in the evening on the day of the flood, and tried to get information elsewhere with no luck. She then drove down the next day, and instead of driving a bit over an hour, it took her 5 hours to get there.
And then I got to see the whole extent of the catastrophe. The roads were all gone, the cars were all gone. You had to walk prodding a stick in front of you so that you couldn't cave in. People came out of their houses like ghosts, just trying to discover if their neighbors were still alive. Are the old people still there? Who is still alive? Who is well and okay? These were our first images here.
Soldiers, construction workers, builders, electricians, and other private people have been helping to clean up since then. But Lara believes better times can only start again when it is possible to start rebuilding rather than ripping things down.
I think the better times can only start again when it is possible to start rebuilding, rather than ripping things down. When kitchens and memories stop being thrown out, but rather when it is possible to start rebuilding again. And when the houses can be lived in again, when the image of the place is normalized again, and not just full of broken cars, furniture, belongings, then maybe a better time can come again. But at the moment, it is still such a big shock, and the question with what happens next, how can we manage this financially? How can we manage it that this place does not just disappear completely, that this whole Ahr Valley doesn't fall apart?
The German government announced that it is ready to provide more emergency aid to support regions hit by floods, with more than the agreed $335.46 million if needed. The floods came just as the European Union was announcing plans, which it says aims to give humanity a fighting chance with catch-all climate plan.
Well, what it really means for Europe and for European citizens is that we're getting serious about this green transition, which needs to take place. Now, the European Union signed up to the Paris Agreement, along with 190-something countries around the world. So we committed to keep emissions, global warming below 2 degrees Celsius and as close to 1.5 degrees as possible. Now, the EU's commitment to the Paris Agreement, to the UNFCCC, is to bring down our emissions by 55% by 2030, so in the next decade. That's a target which is now written into law, so all of our policy needs to go towards that direction. And so what we did this week is to put on the table the legislation which will help to get us there. So this is legislation which covers energy, which covers transport, which covers nature, how we use nature and work with nature to remove carbon from the atmosphere. It covers pricing, it covers taxation and trade policies as well. So it's a really broad set of policies which will help our industries, which will help our citizens to make the transitions that we need to bring down our emissions, to use cleaner energy, to be more efficient with the energy that we use.
European Union policymakers unveiled their most ambitious plan yet on Wednesday, the 14th of July, to tackle climate change, aiming to turn green goals into concrete action this decade and set an example for the world's other big economies to follow.
Europe is now the very first continent that presents a comprehensive architecture to meet our climate ambitions. We have the goal, but now we present the roadmap to how we are going to get there. Our package aims to combine the reduction of emissions with measures to preserve nature and to put jobs and social balance at the heart of this transformation.
The European Commission, the EU executive body, set out in painstaking detail how the bloc's 27 countries can meet their collective goal to reduce net greenhouse gas emissions by 55% from 1990 levels by 2030, a step towards net zero emissions by 2050. This will mean raising the cost of emitting carbon for heating, transport and manufacturing, taxing high carbon aviation fuel and shipping fuel that have not been taxed before, and charging importers at the border for the carbon emitted in making products such as cement, steel and aluminium abroad. It aims to consign the internal combustion engine to history.
The President said, sometimes people say, whoa, take it easy, not that much. It's difficult, it's hard. Yes, it is difficult. Yes, it is hard. But it's also an obligation, because if we would renounce our obligation to help humanity live within planetary boundaries, we would fail not just ourselves, but we would fail our children and our grandchildren, who, in my view, if we don't fix this, will be fighting wars over water and food. So that is, in my view, the background of our efforts. You know, there is the famous quote in Hamlet, time is out of joint, O cursed spite, that ever I was born to set it right. That's it. Time is out of joint, because humanity no longer lives within planetary boundaries. We were born to contribute to set it right, that is, to help humanity learn to live within planetary boundaries. If we get to minus 55 in 2030 and climate neutrality in 2050, humanity has a fighting chance.
The Fit for 55 measures will require approval by member states and the European Parliament, a process that could take 2 years.
The climate transition will be accompanied by a social climate fund. This fund will support income and it will support investments to tackle energy poverty and to cut bills for vulnerable households and small businesses. So this is real support for those that need it most, while the pricing is effective. And this is real solidarity between member states and within member states.
As policymakers seek to balance industrial reforms with the need to protect the economy and promote social justice, they will face intense lobbying from business from poorer member states that want to ward off rises in the cost of living and from the more polluting countries that face a costly transition.
Well, I think it's natural that industry raises questions, raises concerns in any kind of transition. That's something which we have throughout history. But also they need to acknowledge that there is an effort which needs to be made to bring down the emissions. And actually in heavy industry and in the power sector, we've had this emissions trading system in place for the last 16 years in Europe. And in those 16 years, we've managed to reduce emissions in those sectors by almost 43%. So what that shows us is that industry, if they have the right incentives, they can do that. And of course, another thing that we do through this emissions trading for those sectors is we set up a fund, the Innovation Fund, which we have calls for funding, for plans, and we can then use those revenues to put money back into industry to invest in clean processes. So it's a very circular system that we have there. You generate money for clean investments, you channel that back into the industry, and it helps them to clean up. So I think we will expect a similar process in the years ahead also for transport. The car industry in Europe is very strong, but they know that there's a transition that they need to make. And so we deliberately talk to them and ask what they need to make that change. We've all signed up to the Paris Agreement, and we all, in our own way, have to make our commitments to reach those goals and those targets. Now, China, for example, has been talking to the EU for a long time about emissions trading, about carbon pricing. And just last week, on Friday, China launched its emissions trading market. So that actually now becomes, by volume, the biggest carbon market in the world. So you see that China is moving in that direction. They understand the need to come down to net zero as well, and have set a national target for doing that. The US, under the new administration, has set the same target as the EU to be climate neutral by 2050. And now we need to see what each of those partners is going to do domestically to turn those targets into real policy. And we see that as a chance to sit around the table with them, to hear what they're doing.
The EU produces only 8% of global emissions, but hopes its example will elicit ambitious action from other major economies when they meet in November in Glasgow for the next milestone UN climate conference.
Emissions in Europe have already gone down around 25% in the last 30 years, and our GDP has grown around 60% in the same time. So I think what we continue to do is to show the world that economic growth can go alongside climate action, and to show that Europe has targets and it has concrete ideas of how to reach them. And anybody in Glasgow who wants to talk to us about those, we're very happy to share our experiences. I think there's some very positive momentum going into Glasgow. Now, some of these topics were discussed already at COP25 in Madrid at the end of 2019. And we have, I think, a very different global picture to what we had then in terms of the major emitting nations, both developing and developed countries, who have made more positive commitments to cutting their emissions. I think there's an understanding very, very broadly in the G20, G7, in the European Union, as we've discussed, that climate finance is a crucial issue, and that this will be a key part of raising ambitions. And it's a conversation which we're absolutely ready to have with everybody, and we'll be doing that before Glasgow, the EU is embarking on very intensive climate diplomacy. Our diplomats, our political leaders are traveling around the world where that's possible, engaging by the phone, by video conference on all those topics. So let's see where we get to. But I think we go into this very, very optimistically and very positively, and looking to find solutions. That's always the European approach.
Echoing a call by United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres to all countries to do more to avoid a climate catastrophe linked to rising emissions and temperatures, the WMO spokesperson urged action ahead of this year's UN climate conference known as COP26 in Glasgow in November.
On the whole, is prepared, but when you get extreme events such as what we've seen, 2 months worth of rainfall in 2 days, it's very, very difficult to cope. And I've seen photos this morning from I think it was Rhineland-Pfalz. Just it was utter devastation. It was heartbreaking. But it's not just the flooding. At the same time, parts of Scandinavia are enduring a lasting heat wave. Just to give you one example, there's a place called Kuvala-Anjala, and my pronunciation's not very good. It's in southern Finland. It's seen 27 consecutive days with temperatures above 25 degrees Celsius. This is Finland. It's not Spain, it's not North Africa, it's Finland. The Gulf of Finland in the Baltic Sea is record warm, according to researchers at the Finnish Meteorological Institute, up to 26.6 degrees Celsius on the 14th of July. So that's the warmest recorded temperature of the waters since records began. We need to step up climate action. We need to step up the level of ambition. We're not doing nearly enough to stay within the targets of the Paris Agreement and keep temperatures below 2 degrees Celsius, even 1.5 degrees Celsius by the end of this century.
The World Meteorological Organization says there is still a 40% chance of the watershed global warming mark being met during the time frame, and these odds are increasing with time. The 1.5 degrees Celsius mark was established as a desirable target for all the countries of the world who sign up to the Paris Agreement to limit temperature rises in order to prevent permanent changes that threaten the well-being of all life on Earth. The agreement calls for limiting rises to 2 degrees Celsius or below.
Like 20% probability that we would reach a year during the coming 5 years that where we would have already 1.5 degrees warmer climate than during the pre-industrial times. And it's very likely that we will see months where we reach this 1.5 degrees already. So there's 70% probability that we would reach that.
But it does show the warming trend continuing apace, underlining the enormous challenge the world faces in meeting the 2015 Paris Agreement's goal of curbing climate warming emissions enough to keep the rise in temperatures well below 2 degrees Celsius.
So of course the warming of the planet continues, and so far we haven't been very successful in implementation of the Paris Agreement. The greenhouse gas concentrations, especially carbon dioxide concentration, still continues in the atmosphere, and that's the main reason for this warming. And if we would like to reach this low limit of Paris Agreement, we should really enhance the ambition level of emission controls. Especially we should reduce the use of fossil energy, oil, gas and coal during the coming 20 years to be successful in reaching this low limit of Paris Agreement. So we have seen more than double the global warming in the Arctic, and that's going to continue. Then these tropical zones will face lower temperature changes than the global average, and then we estimate that there will be also changes in precipitation patterns for the coming 5 years, and for example South America and Australia and some parts of Africa would face more severe drought during the coming 5 years, and there's an estimation that in Western Europe we will see more often storms than we have seen in the past. So
there is a 90% likelihood of at least 1 year between 2021 and 2025, becoming the warmest on record, which would dislodge 2016 from the top ranking, according to the Global Annual Decadal Climate Update, produced by the United Kingdom's Met Office, the WMO lead center for such predictions. In 2020, one of the 3 warmest years on record, the global average temperature was 1.2 degrees Celsius above the pre-industrial baseline, as seen in the WMO's report on the state of the global climate 2020 released in April. It highlighted the acceleration in climate indicators like rising sea levels, melting sea ice, and extreme weather, as well as worsening impact on socio-economic development. One of the biggest challenges facing the United Kingdom's COP26 presidency will be to persuade countries to commit to more ambitious emissions cut targets and increase finance for countries most vulnerable to climate change. And that's our show for today. Thank you for being a part of it. Please do your part to take care of nature. We'll all be better for it. I'm Ayola Kasim, asking you to join us for another episode of the program next week. From all of us here in Lagos, it's bye for now.